The phone rang at exactly 6:02 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in early November. I was sitting at the kitchen island in the dark, both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Harper was still asleep down the hall. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of traffic 4 stories below. I saw the screen light up. Mom. I picked it up on the second ring. Good morning, Mom. She didn't say good morning back. Paige, I'm calling because your father and I have made a decision about Thanksgiving, and I need you to just listen and not make this into something dramatic. I stayed quiet. I took a sip of the cold coffee. We've decided it's best if you and Harper don't come this year. We're having the Harringtons and the Bakers, and Frank's old colleague Dennis White and his wife. These are real people, Paige. People with real careers and real accomplishments. And every time you come, you start talking about that little computer thing you're doing, and it makes everyone uncomfortable. I didn't respond. I just listened. Your father and I are tired of being embarrassed by this pretend business, Paige. We need the seats for people who actually have careers. The mug was still in my hands. I didn't set it down. I didn't grip it harder. I just held it. It's not a real job, Paige, she continued, her voice settling into that particular tone she used when she believed she was being reasonable. It's a middle-aged woman's version of a lemonade stand, and we're tired of pretending it's impressive. Nolan has an actual position. Jenna is involved with the junior league. These are things people understand. When you sit at that table and start talking about payment processing and seed rounds, people don't know what to say. They smile because they feel sorry for you. And frankly, so do we. I kept my voice steady. I understand. I'll make other arrangements for Harper and myself. Good. I knew you'd be reasonable about this. And Paige, please don't call your father about it. He agrees with me. He just didn't want to be the one to say it. The line went dead. I set the phone face down on the counter. The kitchen was still dark. The coffee was still cold. The apartment was still quiet. I sat there for a long time. If you've ever been uninvited from a family gathering because someone decided you weren't successful enough to sit at their table, hit that like button and subscribe. I need to go back. Because that phone call didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of 32 years of being the wrong kind of daughter. My father, Frank Thornton, spent his entire career as a regional VP at a mid-sized bank in Stamford, Connecticut. He retired at 57 with a pension, a golf membership, and an unshakable belief that the only legitimate career path in America involved a corner office, a title with vice president in it, and a firm handshake. Anything outside that framework wasn't ambition. It was confusion. My mother, Deborah, built her identity around the Stamford social circuit. Country club luncheons, charity galas where the real currency was who sat at which table. She knew everyone's net worth within a $50,000 margin and could rank every family on their street by the make of car in their driveway. Appearance wasn't important to Deborah Thornton. Appearance was everything. And then there was Nolan, 4 years younger than me, the golden child. Nolan played lacrosse in high school. Nolan pledged the right fraternity. Nolan got a job as a manager at a luxury car dealership in Fairfield County, which my parents described at dinner parties as being in automotive finance, as though he were running a hedge fund and not trying to move leftover inventory off a showroom floor. When Nolan wanted to buy into a partnership stake at the dealership 3 years ago, my parents didn't blink. They pulled $150,000 from their retirement savings and handed it to him. No contract, no repayment terms, no questions, just a check and a toast at Sunday dinner. To Nolan, my father said, lifting his glass, the first real businessman in the family. I was sitting right there. I had been running Thornton Pay for 5 years at that point. We had processed $900 million in transactions the previous quarter. I had 17 employees. I had just closed our Series A. My father looked directly at me when he said it. I swallowed it, the way I always did. Because when I was 24 and pregnant with Harper, working 18-hour days from a one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco, writing code during nap times and taking investor calls from the laundromat, I made the mistake of asking my parents for help, not a gift, a cosign. I needed a $15,000 startup loan to cover server costs and my first hire. I had a business plan. I had projections. I had a working prototype that 3 angel investors had already expressed interest in. My father read the first page and set it down. Paige, this isn't a business plan. This is a fantasy. You're a single mother with no degree in computer science, no connections, and no experience running anything larger than a household, which, frankly, you're barely managing. My mother stood behind him in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. "We're not co-signing anything," she said. "What you need to do is stop playing pretend and find a real job. Or better yet, find a husband who has one." They didn't co-sign. They didn't offer $1. They didn't ask to see the prototype. The total financial support my parents provided toward Thornton Pay, toward my career, toward my life as a single mother building something from nothing. $0. Not a cent. Meanwhile, Nolan got $150,000 in cash from their retirement fund. He got Sunday dinners where his name was spoken with pride. He got introductions to their friends at the club. He got Jenna, who wore her engagement ring like a campaign pin and posted Instagram stories from the dealership showroom as though standing next to a car you didn't own was a personality trait. And I got phone calls like the one at 6:02 a.m. telling me I wasn't impressive enough to eat turkey with the neighbors. But here's the part that none of them knew. In 2021, I got a call from Arthur Miller, my lead counsel. Arthur had been with me since the Series A. Calm, precise, the kind of attorney who reads every footnote on every page of every document and remembers them all 6 months later. "Paige," he said, "I flagged something during a routine asset review. Your parents' property in Stamford. There's a lien notice. They're $42,000 behind on property taxes. If they don't resolve it within 90 days, the county can initiate foreclosure proceedings." I didn't hesitate, not because my parents deserved it, because Harper loved that house. She loved the backyard. She loved the oak tree with the swing my father had hung when Nolan was a boy. She called it Grandma's garden, even though Deborah had never once let Harper plant anything in it. I had Arthur set up an anonymous trust, the Heritage Fund. It paid the $42,000 in full. My parents received a letter from the county confirming the balance had been resolved. They assumed it was a clerical correction. They never asked questions. They never said thank you because they never knew there was anything to thank anyone for. $42,000, paid in silence, to protect a house where my daughter wasn't even considered important enough to receive a second piece of cake. Because that's the part I haven't told you yet. 3 weeks before that phone call from my mother, in mid-October, there was a family lunch. Not a holiday, just one of those Sunday gatherings Deborah organized to keep up the routine of appearing close. Nolan was there with Jenna. My parents were there. Harper and I drove up from the city. Harper was sitting at the table, quiet as always. She'd eaten her lunch without complaint. She had said please and thank you. She'd sat with her hands in her lap when she wasn't eating, the way I'd taught her. Jenna had brought a cake, some layered thing from a bakery in Greenwich. Harper's eyes lit up the way a 7-year-old's eyes do when they see frosting. She ate her slice carefully, savoring it. When she finished, she looked up at Jenna and said, in that small, clear voice of hers, "May I please have another piece?" Jenna looked at her, then looked at Nolan, then looked back at Harper. "No, sweetheart. People who don't contribute to the family don't get extras." She said it with a smile, the kind of smile that's designed to look pleasant to everyone else in the room while driving a knife directly into a child. Harper's face didn't crumble. It froze. Her eyes went wide and glassy, and she looked down at her empty plate as though she'd done something wrong by being hungry. My father laughed. A short, sharp sound from the head of the table, like someone had told a mildly clever joke at a cocktail party. My mother covered her mouth, but her shoulders were shaking. She was laughing too. Nolan just shrugged and reached for the cake himself, cutting a thick second slice and dropping it on his own plate without a word. Harper's hand found my sleeve under the table. Her fingers twisted into the fabric so tight her knuckles went white. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply placed my hand over hers and held it. "Harper, we're going to head out," I said. My voice was even. "Say goodbye." "Bye," Harper whispered. She didn't look up. We drove back to the city in silence for the first 40 minutes. I kept both hands on the wheel. I watched the highway. I breathed. Then, from the back seat, in a voice so small it nearly disappeared under the sound of the engine, "Mom, do they not like me because we don't have a lot of money?" I looked at her in the rearview mirror. She was staring out the window. Her reflection showed red-rimmed eyes, but she wasn't crying anymore. She had already stopped herself. At 7 years old, my daughter had already learned to stop herself from crying in front of people. I pulled the car into the next rest stop. I turned off the engine. I unbuckled my seatbelt, got into the back seat, and pulled her into my lap. "You listen to me," I said, my voice quiet and steady. "You are worth more than every person at that table combined, and no one will ever make you feel small in front of me again." She pressed her face into my shoulder. Her body shook once, twice, and then went still. That night, after Harper was asleep, I sat at the kitchen island in the dark. The apartment was quiet. The city hummed far below. My phone screen cast a pale blue glow across the counter. I wasn't angry. That's what surprised me. The anger had burned through hours ago on the drive home, somewhere around Bridgeport, and what was left in its place was something else entirely. Clarity. Something inside me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a clean, quiet break. Like a wire that had been holding too much weight for too long, finally letting go. I was done pretending this was okay. I was done pretending that silence was the same as peace. I was done teaching my daughter that love meant sitting at a table where people laughed when she was humiliated. I was done being the invisible one who paid the taxes and swallowed the insults and drove home in the dark, wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe my work wasn't real. Maybe I wasn't enough. I looked down at the counter. Next to my phone was a drawing Harper had done that afternoon, before the lunch, before Jenna, before the cake. It was a house. A big house with a peaked roof and a chimney and smoke curling out the top. In the front yard, she'd drawn a garden, rows of green lines for plants, a small figure with brown hair kneeling in the dirt, and next to it, a taller figure with a yellow sun overhead. At the bottom, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, she'd written, "Me and Mom's house." I stared at that drawing for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and dialed Arthur Miller. It rang twice. "Arthur, it's Paige. I need you in the office first thing tomorrow. There are some things I need to restructure." "Of course," he said. "What kind of restructuring?" "Family." The line was quiet for a moment. "I'll clear my morning," Arthur said. I hung up. I set the phone face down on the counter. I looked at Harper's drawing one more time. Then I folded it carefully, slid it into my laptop bag, and turned off the kitchen light. The apartment went dark. The city kept humming. And 3 weeks later, Forbes would publish a cover story that would detonate every lie my family had ever told about me. But they didn't know that yet. Nobody did. The morning of November 3rd, I sat across from Arthur Miller in his office at exactly 7:15 a.m. His desk was clean. A single legal pad sat centered in front of him. 2 pens, a glass of water he hadn't touched. Arthur had been my lead counsel since the Series A. He was the kind of attorney who never raised his voice because he never needed to. He read contracts the way surgeons read scans, every line a potential complication, every clause a potential incision. In 6 years, I had never once seen him surprised. I told him what I needed. First, the Heritage Fund. The anonymous trust I had set up in 2021 to pay my parents $42,000 in property tax arrears. I wanted it dissolved. Not quietly, not eventually. Dissolved with a formal reclamation notice sent to Frank and Deborah Thornton at their Stamford address, citing a breach of the good faith clause Arthur had written into the trust's founding documents. The clause requires that the beneficiaries maintain a baseline standard of familial good faith toward the grantor and the grantor's dependents, Arthur said, reading from his own notes. He already had the file open. He'd pulled it before I arrived. A documented pattern of exclusion, emotional harm to a minor dependent, and public disparagement would satisfy the breach threshold. "Document it," I said, already drafting. Second, I told him about the October lunch, about Jenna, about the cake, about Harper's face going blank at the table, about my father laughing, about my mother covering her mouth while her shoulders shook. I told him in the same tone I used in board meetings. Flat, precise, factual. Arthur wrote everything down. He didn't editorialize. He didn't say he was sorry. He just wrote, "I want a record," I said, "time-stamped, witnessed, filed with the trust dissolution as supporting evidence. Consider it done." Third, I told him that under no circumstances, present or future, was any financial instrument, guarantee, loan, or gift to be extended to any member of the Thornton family without my direct, written, notarized approval. I told him to flag any incoming requests from Frank, Deborah, Nolan, or Jenna Thornton and route them directly to his office, where they would be declined in writing within 24 hours. Arthur set his pen down. He looked at me over the top of his glasses. "Paige, are you certain you want the reclamation notice sent before or after the Forbes piece runs?" "After," I said. "Let them read the article first, then let them read the letter." Arthur nodded once. "I'll have Sarah Davis run the final accounting on the trust disbursement and prepare the reclamation package. You'll have it on your desk by Friday." "Thank you, Arthur." "One more thing," he said. "If Nolan or your father contacts me directly, do you want me to engage or redirect?" "Redirect to voicemail," I said. "I'll handle the rest." I left his office at 7:48 a.m. The entire meeting had taken 33 minutes. I drove to Harper's school. I watched her walk through the front doors with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She turned at the entrance and waved at me through the window. I waved back. Then I went to work. For the next 19 days, I said nothing to my family. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't respond to the group chat Deborah maintained with the efficiency of a social secretary, the one where she posted photos of Nolan's dealership events and links to Jenna's Instagram stories and never once mentioned Thornton Pay or Harper's school pictures or anything that belonged to my life. I let the silence sit. On November 22nd, the Monday before Thanksgiving, Forbes published the FinTech 50. The cover featured a photograph of me standing in the Thornton Pay offices in San Francisco. Arms at my sides, no smile, just steady eyes, and the company logo on the wall behind me. The headline read, "Paige Thornton, the single mom who built a $4.1 billion empire in silence." The article ran 4,000 words. It detailed the Series C valuation. It named the investors. It described how I had started the company from a one-bedroom apartment while pregnant, how I had written the initial code base during nap times, how I had bootstrapped the first 2 years on savings and freelance income before closing a seed round that valued the company at $11 million. It mentioned that I held a 21% equity stake. It did the math for the reader. My personal net worth, based on the valuation alone, was approximately $861 million. It mentioned that I had received no financial support from my family. That detail was in the third paragraph. The journalist had asked me directly during the interview, and I had answered with the truth. No embellishment, no bitterness, just the fact. My parents declined to co-sign a $15,000 startup loan in 2017, I told the reporter. I built the company without family investment. That single sentence would do more damage than anything I could have said at a Thanksgiving table. The Forbes digital edition went live at 6 a.m. Eastern. By 7:30 a.m., the article had been picked up by 3 major financial news aggregators. By 9 a.m., it was trending on LinkedIn. By noon, it was everywhere. And here's what I knew that my parents didn't. The Stanford Country Club maintained a digital newsletter. Every Monday morning, the club's communications director curated a roundup of member achievements, promotions, charity events, children's college acceptances. The newsletter pulled automatically from a set of media monitoring feeds tied to member surnames. Thornton was in the system. It had been in the system since my father joined the club in 1998. At 10:17 a.m. on November 22nd, the Stanford Country Club's weekly newsletter went out to 840 members. The lead item, auto-generated, featured a thumbnail of the Forbes cover and the headline, "Club member's daughter leads $4.1 billion fintech company." My mother would have seen it at brunch. My father would have seen it in the clubhouse lounge where the newsletter was displayed on a mounted screen beside the bar. 840 people read it before my parents had a chance to control the story. I know the exact moment my mother found out because my phone began buzzing at 10:43 a.m. I was in a product review meeting. I glanced at the screen. Mom. I set it face down on the table and continued the meeting. It buzzed again and again and again. 14 missed calls from my mother between 10:43 a.m. and 11:15 a.m. 7 from my father, 3 from Nolan, 1 from Jenna, which lasted 4 seconds. She must have hung up before it went to voicemail. I didn't answer any of them. At 11:47 a.m., a text arrived from Nolan. I read it once. "Paige, I need to talk to you. It's urgent. The dealership is in trouble. I need a guarantor for a $250,000 loan to cover a floor plan interest shortfall. If I don't get it by December 1st, they're going to terminate me and possibly pursue litigation. You have to help me. I'm your brother." I stared at the message for exactly 6 seconds. Then I typed 4 words. "I'm busy with my hobby." I paused, deleted it, retyped. "I'm busy with my hobby. Ask a professional." I pressed send. I set the phone face down. I returned to the product review. If you've ever had a family member only call you when they needed your money after years of calling your work a joke, hit that like button and subscribe. The voicemail started stacking that afternoon. I didn't listen to a single one. Sarah Davis, the forensic accountant Arthur had brought in to finalize the trust reclamation, told me later that she'd reviewed the phone logs as part of the documentation. 47 missed calls in the first 72 hours, 23 voicemails, hundreds of texts. I turned off the ringer. I let the notifications pile up like leaves against a window. I didn't open them. I didn't need to. On November 24th, Thanksgiving Day, at 4:17 p.m., the intercom in my penthouse buzzed. I was in the kitchen with Harper. We were making our own dinner, a small turkey breast, mashed potatoes from scratch, green beans from the farmer's market. Harper was standing on her step stool, carefully stirring the potatoes with a wooden spoon, her tongue poking out in concentration. The intercom buzzed again, then a third time. I walked to the panel and pressed the button. Yes? The building's concierge, a man named Thomas, spoke carefully. Ms. Thornton, there are 2 individuals in the lobby requesting access. A Frank Thornton and a Deborah Thornton. They say they're your parents. I looked across the kitchen at Harper. She was still stirring, humming something to herself. She hadn't heard. Please let them know I'm not available, I said. They're quite insistent, ma'am. The gentleman says... My father's voice cracked through the speaker, shouting over him. You knew you were worth hundreds of millions when we asked for that loan, and you let your brother drown? There is no emergency, Thomas, I said, my voice flat. Please, ask them to leave. If they refuse, contact building security. Understood, ma'am. I released the button. I walked back to the kitchen. Who was that? Harper asked without looking up. Nobody important, I said. I picked up the peeler and started on the carrots. Thomas called back 11 minutes later. Frank and Deborah had refused to leave the lobby. My father had raised his voice. My mother was crying. Security had escorted them to the front entrance. They were now standing on the sidewalk outside the building. Frank's shirt was untucked. Deborah's mascara was streaked below her eyes. They left a note with the front desk, Thomas said. Hold it for me, I said. I'll collect it tomorrow. I never collected it. I told Thomas to shred it the following Monday. That evening, after dinner, Harper and I sat on the couch. She had her head on my shoulder. Her plate was clean. The apartment smelled like turkey and butter and the lavender candles she'd picked out at the store the week before. Mom, she said, yeah, baby. This is the best Thanksgiving we've ever had. I pressed my lips to the top of her head. I didn't trust myself to speak for a moment. Yeah, I said finally, it is. That night, after Harper was asleep, I sat at the kitchen island one last time. My phone was face down on the counter. The screen hadn't lit up in over an hour. The calls had finally stopped. I opened my contacts. I scrolled to Frank Thornton. I pressed block. I scrolled to Deborah Thornton. I pressed block. I scrolled to Nolan Thornton. Block. Jenna Thornton. Block. I removed myself from the family group chat. I deleted the thread without reading the last 48 hours of messages. I opened my email. I found every message from a Thornton address and archived them unread. I set a filter. Any future emails from those addresses would bypass my inbox entirely and route to a folder I would never open. I didn't do it in anger. I did it in clarity. The apartment was dark. Harper was breathing softly down the hall. The city hummed outside the windows the way it always did, steady and indifferent and wide awake. I picked up Harper's drawing from my laptop bag. The big house with the garden, the 2 figures in the yard, me and Mom's house. I smoothed it flat on the counter. I looked at it for a long time. Then I turned off the kitchen light, and the door between my old life and my new one closed without a sound. The reclamation notice arrived at 14 Birchwood Lane in Stamford on December 2nd. Arthur confirmed delivery. Certified mail. Signature required. Deborah signed for it at 9:41 a.m. The letter was 3 pages. It identified the Heritage Fund by its trust number. It named Paige Thornton as the sole grantor. It detailed the $42,000 disbursement made on behalf of Frank and Deborah Thornton in 2021 to resolve delinquent property taxes owed to the city of Stamford. It cited the good faith clause. It described the breach in precise clinical language, documented exclusion of a minor dependent, public disparagement of the grantor's livelihood, and the specific incident at the October lunch involving Harper. Sarah Davis had prepared the accounting. Every figure was exact. Every date was time-stamped. The letter concluded with a formal demand for repayment of the $42,000 within 60 days, plus a dissolution notice terminating the trust effective immediately. Arthur told me later that Deborah called his office 14 minutes after signing for the envelope. His assistant took the message. Deborah's voice was described as elevated and unsteady. She demanded to speak with Paige. She was informed that all communications regarding the trust were to be directed to Arthur's office in writing. She hung up. Frank called 20 minutes after that. He was quieter. He asked if the letter was real. Arthur's assistant confirmed it was. Frank asked if there was a way to discuss this like reasonable people. He was told to submit his response in writing. He hung up too. I didn't hear any of this in real time. Arthur sent me a summary email at the end of the day. I read it once, noted the timestamps, and closed it. That was the last direct contact any Thornton made with my legal team for 3 weeks, but the damage had already started moving on its own. The Forbes article didn't disappear after the first day. It circulated the way these things do in small, wealthy communities, where everyone reads the same newsletters and attends the same fundraisers and measures each other with the precision of jewelers appraising stones. The Stamford Country Club newsletter had been the first wave. The second wave was slower, quieter, and far more destructive. By mid-December, the story had become the only story in my parents' social circle. Not the $4.1 billion valuation, not the technology, not even the Forbes cover itself. The story was the sentence in the third paragraph, the one about the $15,000 loan, the one about no family support. That single line rewrote everything Frank and Deborah had spent 30 years constructing. Because for 30 years, my parents had curated a very specific narrative at that club. Frank was the retired banking executive with a well-connected family. Deborah was the gracious hostess with the perfect children. Nolan was the up-and-coming businessman. And Paige, if she was mentioned at all, was the older daughter who lived out west, doing something with computers, probably struggling. Bless her heart. That narrative was now rubble. The whispers started at the club's holiday cocktail reception on December 14th. Deborah attended. She wore pearls. She carried herself with the kind of rigid posture that comes from knowing people are watching and not knowing what they're saying. I heard about it later through Arthur, who heard it from a contact in Stamford's legal community. The details were specific enough to be reliable. Margaret Harrington, the same Margaret Harrington who had been invited to my parents' Thanksgiving table in my place, approached Deborah near the bar. She smiled the way women in that world smile when they're about to draw blood. Deborah, I had no idea your page was so accomplished. We all read the Forbes piece. You must be so proud. Deborah said something about being a very private family. Of course, Margaret said, though I did wonder. The article mentioned she started with no family support. Surely that can't be entirely accurate. Deborah excused herself. She left the reception 40 minutes early. Frank stayed behind, sitting alone at a corner table, staring at a glass of scotch he never finished. The Harringtons told the Bakers. The Bakers told the Whites. Dennis White, my father's old banking colleague, the one who had been given Paige and Harper's Thanksgiving seats, called Frank directly and asked if it was true that they'd refused to co-sign a $15,000 loan for a daughter who was now worth $861 million. Frank didn't answer the question. He changed the subject to the weather. Dennis didn't call again. By January, the invitation stopped. The club luncheons Deborah organized went unattended. The charity gala committee she'd co-chaired for 11 years quietly replaced her with Linda Taylor, a newer member who had the advantage of not being publicly associated with having disowned a billionaire daughter. Deborah stopped going to the club in February. Frank's golf foursome dissolved in March. Nobody told them they were unwelcome. Nobody had to. The empty chairs said it clearly enough. The financial collapse moved on a parallel track. Nolan never got his $250,000 loan. Without a guarantor, every bank he approached ran standard due diligence and found the same things: a dealership with declining revenue, a floor plan interest shortfall that had been growing for 18 months, and a personal credit score of 489 weighed down by 3 maxed credit cards and a second car payment on a vehicle he couldn't afford. On January 15th, the dealership ownership group terminated Nolan's management contract for gross financial negligence. The shortfall had grown to $263,000 by that point. The ownership group's attorneys sent a demand letter. Nolan retained a lawyer, paid for by Frank, who took a $12,000 advance against the second mortgage on the Stamford house that Deborah didn't know about until the statement arrived in February. The $400,000 second mortgage. That was the other thing the Heritage Fund dissolution uncovered. When Sarah Davis ran the final accounting, she flagged it. Frank had taken a second mortgage on the Stamford property 18 months earlier. $400,000. The funds had gone to Nolan's dealership, not as an investment, as a quiet bailout to cover the first round of floor plan shortfalls that Nolan had been hiding from the ownership group. The house my parents had lived in for 26 years, the house worth $1.1 million on a good day, now carried $400,000 in secondary debt, plus the original mortgage balance. And the $42,000 reclamation notice was now sitting on top of the pile. They listed the house in April. It sold in 5 weeks for $930,000, $170,000 less than its assessed value. After the mortgages, the closing costs, and the reclamation repayment, they walked away with less than $80,000. They moved to a 2-bedroom rental in Norwalk. Deborah's new address didn't have a garden. It had a shared parking lot and a dumpster enclosure visible from the kitchen window. Nolan and Jenna's trajectory was steeper. Without the dealership income, Nolan picked up a position at a used car lot in Bridgeport. Not management, sales floor. His base was $2,400 a month plus commission that rarely materialized because Nolan had never actually been good at selling things. He'd been good at standing next to expensive things and implying they belonged to him. Jenna's Instagram went private in March. The Junior League membership lapsed. The Greenwich Bakery cakes stopped appearing. They moved out of their Fairfield rental and into a 1-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner in Stratford. Jenna took a part-time position at a boutique clothing store. She worked Saturdays. I didn't seek any of this information out. It arrived the way information does when a family's collapse becomes public record, through Arthur's routine monitoring, through Sarah Davis's financial tracking, through the quiet, persistent machinery of documentation I had put in place and then walked away from. I felt nothing when I read the updates. Not satisfaction, not pity, nothing. The wire had been cut. There was no current left to carry. 3 weeks passed, then 8 weeks, then 4 months. Harper and I moved in June. Not to a penthouse, to a house. A real one. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a backyard with old oak trees and enough flat ground for raised garden beds that Harper designed herself on graph paper, measuring each row with a ruler and labeling them in her careful handwriting. Tomatoes, sunflowers, basil, strawberries. I paid $4.2 million in cash, no mortgage, no cosigner, no phone call to anyone asking for permission. Harper's room had pale green walls, she chose the color, and a window that looked out over the garden. Her college fund was fully funded. Her school was 3 blocks away. Her teacher told me at the spring conference that Harper had started raising her hand more, that she joined the gardening club, that she smiled easier than she had in the fall. One Saturday morning in late June, I was kneeling in the garden beside Harper. The sun was warm on the back of my neck. She was pressing strawberry seeds into a row she'd marked with popsicle sticks, her fingers careful and deliberate. She paused. She sat back on her heels and looked up at me. "Mom? Are we ever going to go to the club? The one Grandma and Grandpa go to?" I brushed the dirt from my hands. I looked at my daughter. Her hair was pulled back with a band she'd picked herself. There was a smudge of soil on her chin. "No, honey," I said. "We own the club now. We don't need to go." She thought about that for a moment. Then she nodded, the way she does when something makes sense to her in a way she can feel, but doesn't need to explain. "Good," she said. "I like our garden better." She went back to her seeds. I went back to mine. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm. It was steady. It was ours. I didn't let him drown. I just stopped pretending I was his life jacket. The water is actually quite shallow if you just stand up. Some doors close, so better ones can open. I never regretted a single second of it. If you enjoyed this story about protecting your daughter and knowing your worth even when your own family refuses to see it, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.